I want to go into the other biggie, the super biggie. Should Mueller have demanded an in-person interview with the subject of this probe, Donald Trump, who falsely claimed he'd do it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. No question.
I would love to speak. I would love to. Nobody wants to speak more than me. In fact, against my lawyers, because most lawyers, they never speak on anything. I would love to speak.
Does it make you want to talk to Mueller and put an end to it? Does it make you want to talk to him? Because that's what Rudy Giuliani was.
Would you be willing to speak under oath to give your version of those events?
100%.
So if Robert Mueller wanted to speak with you about that,
I would be glad to
tell
tell him exactly what I just told you, John.
John Flannery, if you have a subject talking like that and you have the powers of the special counsel's office, do you force that issue in court?
Absolutely. It was a constitutional conflict of major historic importance with a foreign nation interfering with our elections. And he's telling the public, I want to talk, and never is doing it. Take him at his word, take him to court, fight for it. And if you lose it, you were in the game. I've said before, you can't win the argument you don't make. And that was a critical element. In fact, none of the targets were interviewed. Not Don Jr., not any of the people that would tell you what was going on. And Mueller was on notice for this. And Rosenstein and Barr, who came lately to the game, had done lots of things. He was on notice. He couldn't have been unconscious.
Let's play that out, because in fairness to the team, the Mueller report addresses this, as you both know. And John, the Mueller report says, we tried, but it would have taken too long to litigate that out. Is that a valid excuse or answer in your view? Or could they have given some update to the public and said, at this juncture, we are not currently planning on any future indictments, but we are going to go all the way to the Supreme Court if we have to get this testimony given the import of these issues?
You know, I think, Ari, if they had gone all the way to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court said, yes, you can lawfully subpoena a president to the grand jury, which I predict that's what the Supreme Court would have said, all the president's lawyers had to do was say, fine, we thereby invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and that trumps.
This is fascinating because you guys know this stuff so well. So you just gave us multiple pieces of chess, litigation, and then a criminal defense strategy. But wait, Glenn, I'm hearing you saying the sitting president of the United States would then be forced to come out and say that on the grounds that he would incriminate himself of a crime, he won't speak after what we just showed, which is him claiming otherwise. Wouldn't that be a constructive thing for a probe?
Yeah, well, you know, we actually cannot use, as public servants, we are not permitted to use somebody's invocation of their Fifth Amendment right as evidence against them.
I know.
In the public sector, sure.
I'm going to go to John. That is true, and I appreciate your care, and that's what prosecutors do. But, John, the Congress might have an interest in assessing that, and they are allowed to assess that.
Yes, and there's a big difference between somebody telling you I'm going to assert the Fifth and doing it. And you should force him to assert the Fifth Amendment. And if he asserts the Fifth Amendment, you have to determine what does it cover. There are areas he talked about and exposed, and so he can't assert the Fifth Amendment as the things he's already discussed publicly that he would argue hurt him. And so it's not so simple a question as to say, I have the Fifth Amendment.
Do you think it would be, and I'm not talking about being out to get anyone, but do you think, Flannery, especially given the work you've done with congressional probes, do you think it would be constructive in this Trump era if that were the result that Glenn theorizes?
Yes, well, I don't think it would be the result, because he'd have 100 people saying you have a lifetime of complaining. I had a different word in mind. Complaining about other people taking the Fifth Amendment.
Well,
so you take it like mobsters do, which is what he said mobsters do. And you know what? That's an organized crime reference that fits this administration.
And last one, lightning round. If Mueller was never going to indict the president or conclude he committed crimes, should he have made that clearer earlier, which would have also denied Barr and Trump the chance to exploit any confusion about it? Glenn?
Yes, managing public expectations in some way, I think, would have been helpful in framing what we now learn from the Mueller report.
But I think that's what Rosenstein figured. Rosenstein figured this is a safe bet. And if I appoint Mueller, even if the president thinks he's going to lose, that the good thing about it is he'll never be indicted. He will not exercise the constitutional ability, which is in the Constitution, that allows one to go forward, that Jaworski and Starr believe allowed you to indict a sitting president, as happened with Vice President Agnew when he was a sitting vice president, and they prosecuted him.
Glenn Kirshner, John Flannery, I defy anyone to find a more fulsome, chopped up analysis of these very difficult issues. And I will say for the record, and I know that the three of us agree on this, discussing these challenges is not impugning the good faith of the many hardworking people who wrestled with these issues, investigating a president. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.